Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating 23-year chronological journey of the Holy Qur'an's revelation. When we read historical texts, it's so easy to just view them as a single static document. But the Qur'an is incredibly dynamic. It was revealed gradually, constantly reacting to, shaping, and guiding a growing community through immense hardships and ultimately massive triumphs. So today, we're going to unpack exactly how understanding the timeline of this revelation, specifically the Meccan and Medina phases, completely unlocks the context of its entire message. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with 2 phases 1 message, then move into the Makkan Foundation and the Madinan Society. After that, we'll compare the two, look at the fascinating science of how scholars actually classify them, and wrap up with why this historical context is so crucial for us right now. All right, part 1. 2 phases, 1 message. And we really can't talk about this without highlighting the absolute pivotal role of the Hijra. To deeply understand the Quran's context, you have to look at this massive dividing line in Islamic history. The migration of Prophet Muhammad and the early Muslims from Mecca to Medina wasn't just a change of scenery. It totally transformed their societal status and drastically shifted the tone of the divine revelation. So here's a massive misconception we need to clear up right off the bat. When we classify verses as Makkina or Madinan, we are primarily talking about a timeline, not just geography. A verse is Makkina if it came down before the Hijra. It's Madinan if it was revealed after the Hijra. That means even if the Prophet returned to Mecca years later and received a revelation right there, scholars still classify it as Madinan. Why? Because it belongs to that post-migration era of an established Islamic society. Make sense, right? This timeline brilliantly maps out the gradual nature of the revelation. Look at this. For 13 long years in Mecca, the Muslims were a severely persecuted minority. So the focus? Purely on building unshakable foundational faith. Then boom, we hit the Hijra, the ultimate turning point. For the next 10 years in Medina, with a thriving independent community, the revelation shifts to organizing that society. It's an incredible 23-year split. First, you build strong individuals, and only then do you build an organized community. Moving right along to part 2, the Makkan Foundation, or building faith under extreme hardship. Let's step into the Makkan era and see how this builds the spiritual core of the early Muslim community. Imagine being part of a tiny, heavily targeted group facing daily abuse. You really don't need complex international trade laws at that point, do you? You need hope. You need resilience. So for these 13 years, it's all about absolute faith. The focus is entirely on Tawheed, the absolute oneness of Allah, and really vivid, visceral descriptions of the hereafter. To comfort these struggling believers, we get these powerful stories of past prophets, like Nuh, Musa, and Ibrahim, essentially showing that struggling for the truth is historically normal. Linguistically, these verses are short, punchy, and highly rhythmic. They use strong, intense rebukes like kala, meaning nay or never, to fiercely challenge the idolaters. And check out the universal call used here. Because there wasn't a formal, distinct Islamic society yet, the Quran frequently uses the phrase Ya ayyuhan nas, or O mankind. It's addressing all of humanity, asking literally everyone to just stop and reflect on the most basic, universal truths about their creator and their ultimate destination. Okay, part 3, the Madinan society. This is where we transition from individuals to a full-blown community. Following the Hijra, everything changes. The community grows, they gain physical security, and suddenly they need completely new guidance to manage their affairs. The foundation of faith has been poured, now it's time to build the house. So here, the verses become these foundational blueprints for establishing a fully functional, just society. The Medina Surahs are absolutely packed with practical legislations. We start seeing detailed rulings on acts of worship, like the obligatory zakat charity and Ramadan fasting. We get comprehensive guidelines on social justice, marriage laws, and governance. Plus, because the social dynamics were so different in Medina, these verses uniquely address new groups, like the people of the book, and they heavily expose the munafiqeen, the hypocrites who pretended to be believers on the outside but plotted from the inside. You can see this massive shift in the script clearly. The Quran is no longer just addressing mankind at large. Now it frequently uses Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. It is speaking directly to an established, incredibly dedicated community that's already accepted the basics and is now ready to take on advanced instructions and serious societal responsibilities. Let's jump into part 4, Comparing the two revelations side by side, seeing these two incredible eras right next to each other really highlights just how perfectly tailored the message was to the exact psychological and social state of the people receiving it. You can almost literally hear the rhythmic urgency of the early days versus the calm instructional tone of the later days. Makkan verses hit you like a lightning bolt. They're designed to wake up a dormant soul with powerful emotional imagery. But the Madinan verses, they read much more like a constitution or a legal text. They take their time, they're longer, detailed, and perfectly suited for calmly explaining complex legal boundaries. This really brings the whole picture together. 13 years of faith building for all mankind with short, powerful verses in Makkah, followed by 10 years of society building specifically for the believers with longer, detailed laws in Medina. It's like you wouldn't teach a child calculus before they know basic addition, right? Divine wisdom dictated establishing that unshakable faith first before establishing the complex social laws. And while these contexts differ immensely, remember, they're absolutely not two different messages. They seamlessly fuse into one complete guidance for humanity. The deep, strong roots of the Makkan faith perfectly support the heavy branches of the Madinan laws, creating one single perfect tree of Islam. Which brings us to part 5, the science of classification. How do scholars actually solve this historical puzzle? Because, as you know, the Quran isn't arranged chronologically in the book itself. So figuring out the exact timeline requires some very serious historical detective work. And the absolute master key to this detective work is a massively important concept called asbab al-nuzul, which translates to the occasions or causes of dissension. Understanding exactly why and when a verse came down is the ultimate tool scholars use to unlock correct classifications. Because a verse was often a direct response to a very specific question, a battle, or a dispute, identifying the asbab al-nuzul anchors that verse to a definitive historical reality. Once you find that historical trigger, you instantly know where that verse sits on the timeline. So how do the scholars do it? Step 1. They pore over verified narrations from the companions who were literally in the room when the revelation occurred. Step 2. They use those accounts to pinpoint the asbab al-nuzul, the exact event that caused the revelation. Then, step 3 is conducting a deep linguistic analysis. If it's got short, fiery rhymes about the Day of Judgment, it's highly likely Makkan. If it calmly details inheritance fractions, it's Madinan. And finally, step 4, they lock it accurately onto the timeline relative to the Hijra. It's an incredibly methodical process. By cross-referencing these linguistic styles with the asbab al-nuzul, scholars ensure that the deep historical context of the Quran is preserved with rigorous, almost scientific precision. Absolutely nothing is left to guesswork here. And finally, part 6, why this matters today. Because we absolutely have to apply this to our modern lives. We know the history, we know the science, but why is this dual framework still so vital for us right now? Well, for one, knowing this timeline protects the text from being taken out of context or misunderstood, but even more importantly, recognizing that strong faith has to be established before demanding complex actions gives us a flawless blueprint for personal growth. Think about it. If you're trying to improve yourself, or if you're engaging in dawah, calling others to the faith, you don't start by throwing a heavy rulebook at them. You start exactly where the Makkan revelation started, with the heart, with faith, and with a connection to the Creator. Once that psychological foundation is solid, the Madinan actions just follow naturally. We live in an era of instant gratification, right? We all want quick fixes, but divine wisdom dictated a full 13-year incubation period just for building internal belief before society-level changes were demanded. So, if the Qur'an took 13 years to build a foundation of faith before introducing complex laws, how might that change the way you approach your own spiritual journey today? I'll leave you to reflect on that, because understanding the history of the Qur'an doesn't just inform us, it completely transforms how we read it, how we understand the world, and how we build our own foundations today.